So, Elliot, the reason why I was so excited about having a conversation with you today is that I really want you to shed some light on what a manager is and what a manager does, as well and as well as to address some of the ways that somebody can get into the profession of personal management if they choose to.
Okay. Well, if we could take this in bite-sized pieces, it would probably be good. So,
Okay.
What a manager is, the way I like to think about it is the manager is pretty much like the president of a small company, where the shareholders really want to focus on being creative. In this case, it's making music, but it could just as easily be designing ball bearings. They just want to go be creative.
Right.
And they either don't have the time or the talent or the inclination to run the day-to-day business. So essentially they hire somebody, except in this case, it's not somebody inside their company. They hire an outside person basically to run their company for them, run the day-to-day operations of their company. And that's really what a manager is. You run the company.
The day-to-day operations.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you like to think about it kind of in corporate terms, the artist is like the board of directors. They're responsible for making, the big decisions, the big creative decisions, the big policy decisions.
Right.
And they essentially give a certain amount of authority to the president to make that happen.
Okay. Right. And the board has a lot of power.
Yeah.
The board has a lot of power.
Yeah, and the artist has a lot of the power in the relationship with the manager.
So, a lot of people define management in many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Define what a manager is not.
Okay, manager, boy, it really depends. Manager is not Rumpelstiltskin, does not turn straw into gold,
Right.
for starters. What's going to define whether an artist is successful really has a lot more to do with the artist than it does with the manager.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, managers obviously like to think what they do is important. I've certainly contributed to the success of some of my clients, but I didn't make them huge. They made themselves huge.
Okay.
But what I did was I kept them from making bad decisions. I advised them. I mean, a manager's power inside the relationship with the artist is really the power to persuade. It's most of the time it's not, and it definitely shouldn't be the power to make the decisions. The big decisions are to be made by the artist.
So when you say the manager's job is not to turn, they're not Rumpelstiltskin. They're not going to turn straw into gold. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about what the artist brings to the table to begin with.
Yeah.
What about the notion that the manager is supposed to play a role in developing that straw, helping to develop it to where it actually has more value than what it is?
Well, I mean, this is a really good question, Gian. Managers can play so many different kinds of roles inside the relationship. There are times when managers just view themselves as, business. I'm going to do business. I'm not going to tell you, how to write your songs. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to tell you how to sing. And there are a lot of artists that don't want to hear that from their manager. Sometimes they do,
Okay.
So it really depends on the individuals. Okay. I mean, I've had clients who would have been outraged had I really pushed them hard to for their music to be a certain way,
right.
or for the recordings to sound a certain way. I mean, I had one client that made an album and decided that they wanted no reverb whatsoever on the recording, none, like not even a touch. And if we were in the studio together and anybody even suggested, could we just listen to the vocals back
right.
with a little bit of reverb, they would get very unhappy.
They wanted artistic integrity.
Yes.
Right.
No reverb. So it turns out, they finished an album, they mixed it with no reverb, and they went on the road for about 2 or 3 months. And little by little, they began to realize how small the snare drum sounded,
right.
how small the vocals sounded, and they realized it wasn't such a good idea. But they didn't want to hear it at first. And I have had other clients that are really interested in what I think, because I'm a musician in addition to being a manager and a lawyer. So I've got pretty good ears, and sometimes my suggestions are good, and sometimes they're terrible.
Someone said to me many years ago, with regard to personal management, that ultimately the success of the relationship comes down to respect.
And trust.
And trust.
Yeah, I think so.
And trust is a part of respect. The two are intertwined. How important is that? How important is that, and why?
Well, the trust is important because an artist is giving a manager an enormous amount of authority, basically to represent the artist to the world. I mean, frequently, at least in the business world, the manager is the face of the artist. So as an artist, you really need to believe that the manager has your best interests in mind, that you can really trust the person. And also you can trust his judgment, that he's not going to make stupid decisions on your behalf, that he's going to represent you in the way that you want to be represented.
Right.
For example, if you're, if the manager goes around acting like the mafia and you as an artist hate people who behave that way, well, you're going to start getting viewed that way.
Right.
As really, really heavy-handed and, just unbelievably controlling and harsh. If you don't want to be perceived that way, you need your manager not to be like that.
Right.
So.
The whole association and assimilation thing.
Yeah.
And let's speak to the respect part a little bit. And what I'm finding when I talk to people in many different circles is that sometimes the manager feels as though the artist does not respect them. And I say, if the manager doesn't feel respected, usually it's because the artist doesn't really know what they do. Mm-hmm. What has been your experience in that regard?
I try to let my clients know what I do. I welcome them. You want to sit in a meeting? You want to listen to my half of a telephone conversation? You want to see the emails that run? How much do you want to be copied on everything?
Okay.
I want them to know what I do. And most of what I do is marshaling resources on their behalf. And if they're at a very, very early stage of their career, the chances are that nobody can afford to marshal the resources, so it's mostly going to come from me.
Right.
And managers of artists at very early stages in their career end up essentially doing everything. Sometimes they end up booking the shows, although in California, at least you're not supposed to do that. They end up as the tour manager, they end up as the accountant,
right.
They end up as, as the sole marketer. Mm-hmm. They can spend 15 hours a day doing nothing but sending out email blasts. You got to do everything.
Okay.
I had a legal client at one point who wanted me to fire their manager. And I said, what's the problem with him? Because it seems like you're doing pretty well. Mm-hmm. They had just signed a major label deal and getting a lot of really good press. And one of the guys in the band said, well, he can't read and he can't talk. I mean, not literally, but he just doesn't read very well, and he can't write, and he's just not very smart.
Talking about their manager.
Yeah, and they just really didn't have any respect for him. That's not a good relationship with a manager.
Well, and then some people would say, how true is that? And maybe the expectation level, which brings me to this other part here, which is how important is it to discuss expectations with an artist before you take them on?
Oh, extremely. Mm-hmm. Because, I think the difference between artist expectations and reality ruins a lot of relationships with managers. And I have pretty strong feelings about this, and I've come at this from all angles. I started out my career as a signed artist, played in a very successful band for several years. So I've been through all of this. I know the inflated expectations that a lot of artists have. And I know how badly they get treated at early parts of their career at the same time. So it's kind of a funny dichotomy. But a lot of artists just assume that they are fabulously talented. And I guess they have to, because it's a tough way to make a living, and the chances of success are very slim. And so you deal with a lot of slights early in your career. So I guess you really, really need to believe in yourself.
Is it a matter of defining the expectations or managing them, or both?
Well, I try to be really honest with my clients. One of the things that happens, especially as they start to get successful and labels start coming around, is that the labels all sing a song to them about how huge they're likely to be and how much the label really loves them,
Right.
and how much they're going to make them an enormous priority. And what the people from the labels never say is that it's very hard for them to figure out who's going to be really successful and who isn't. It's just, it's tough to pick it. And consequently, they oversign. And they sign more artists than they could possibly market and promote effectively. And the end result of that is a lot of records never come out, especially these days. And of the records that come out, relatively few of them are going to get the full attention of the label. And yet the label can't possibly say, or think they can't possibly say that to the new artists because, you know, they just wouldn't go there. So consequently, they tell them how much attention they're going to get. And the end result are crushed expectations and broken hearts and shattered careers.
Okay,
a
and
lot
so
of times.
that sounds to me like it's a matter of managing all the expectations
Yeah.
from a multitude of areas.
Yeah, so what I try to say to my artists is, look, the chances of, unless you are one of these rare talents that comes around, you know, maybe every 5 or 10 years, and there are those, people who are just completely undeniable, but there are relatively few of those. Other than that, you know, you're sort of casting your fate to the wind. The chances that you're going to get past your second album or third album, statistically, are, I don't know, maybe 20%. Which means there's an 80% chance that you're going to get that major label deal, your records are going to come out, not do very well, and you're going to get dropped.
Right.
That's just the reality. That's what you signed up for, you know, and you decided not to be an accountant. You decided to be a musician. And it's more fun being a musician than it is being a lawyer.
Right.
Trust me, or a
Right.
manager, trust me, you know, it really is. But the chances of you being really successful are small, so you've got to work your ass off, number one. And number two, realize that the world is not likely just to come to your door with their arms open and say, oh God, we love you.
Right, right. You got to go out there and kick their door down.
Yeah.
Right, right. You know, there's a, with regard to managing expectations, there is another component to this which I'm finding to be very interesting in the last 5 to 10 years. Attending the California Lawyers for the Arts Music Business Seminar, and to discover that Dina LaPolte is now doing management and now responsible for directing or co-directing the career of Steve Tyler from Aerosmith. And just more and more attorneys I'm seeing are getting into management. Now, your background is as an attorney. You went to Columbia University and, you know, majored in jurisprudence, correct?
Well, actually, that was while I was at Bolt.
You're at Bolt.
At Berkeley's Law School.
Right.
So.
And so you did the law.
Yeah.
And then you ended up managing. So law first, then management. Well, actually being an artist, law, then
Well,
management.
actually, there was, yeah. And but the management and the lawyering came within about a year or so of each
So they're
other,
very
2
close.
years. It was very close. And what happened is that I had a legal client who had fired their manager, and they needed a manager, and my job was to go out and look for one.
Okay.
And I kept trying to find them a manager, and I couldn't find
And
them.
you couldn't find one.
I couldn't find them a really good manager, and they kept
Exactly.
saying, well, how about you? And I would say, well, you know, it's really not my kind of
Exactly.
music.
So, and that is my question. That is my question. And the question is the reasons why there are so many attorneys who are getting into management now is because there's such a shallow pool of qualified managers, or does the attorney, does the manager with the attorney background just bring so much more to the table?
Well, I think you bring a lot to the table. I mean, managers come from various backgrounds. There are some who've come from a legal background. Some who've come from a production background. There are a bunch who've come from a tour managing background. There are some who've just come from a straight business background. There are all sorts of ways that you can do it well. But I think the reason that lawyers, it's a lot more fun being a manager of a successful act than it is being a lawyer. It just is.
Okay.
Being a manager of an act that's doing really well is a great job. And it can be very lucrative. I mean, much more lucrative than being a lawyer.
So the manager who has a legal background, now the artist is getting what I perceive as a 2-for-1, because inevitably there's going to be legal issues that have to be taken care of.
Yes. Although both that act and the manager are well advised that the band also have another lawyer.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Now, why is that?
Because my feeling is that if you're acting both as manager and as lawyer, you just got too much power in your hands.
Okay.
And the artist really is entitled to a completely independent legal opinion. So, for example, almost all of the time when I've been a manager, the artist has had another lawyer. The only time that was not the case, I was kind of the second banana manager and also acting as the lawyer, but I didn't really call the shots.
Okay.
But most of the time, sometimes I've started out as the lawyer. The artist and I have decided that we're going to change the relationship. The first thing I've said is, go out and find another lawyer, and here's 5 or 6 suggestions of experienced music business attorneys.
Wow, wow, and that is your personal preference. That's just how you choose to deal with that situation, or are you finding that to be an industry norm?
That's an industry norm, I
Okay.
think.
Okay.
Yeah, because one of the things, you're just also looking for trouble. If there's a busted relationship, and you've also been acting as the attorney. Attorneys, believe it or not, are held to extraordinarily high standards of conduct.
Right.
And you're just, if you're acting as both, you're really
Opening yourself
up.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about the viewers who see this tape.
Mm-hmm.
Those who have interests and aspirations of becoming professional personal managers.
Mm-hmm.
What do you suggest that they do to make that a reality?
Well, there are a couple of ways to go about this. One of them is essentially to work with an experienced manager and learn the trade that way. And there aren't that many successful personal managers around, and most of them are probably in the big media centers of Los Angeles and New York and Nashville. And so you might want to move there and see if you can, find a way to get a job working for one of them and learn it from the ground up like that.
Yeah, yeah. The whole idea of apprenticeship.
Mm-hmm.
But you're talking about moving to one of the major music industry capitals.
Okay.
But even here in the Bay Area, if somebody were here in the Bay Area, and I get a lot of students at San Francisco State that say, I want to get into personal management. I can think of at least 4 students who I know who are really interested in that, and they've done the necessary training in terms of their education. But they just feel as though the number of managers who could bring them under their wing, they just have difficulties connecting with them. So,
Well, there aren't a lot of them to connect with, unfortunately. They can afford to pay them anything.
Gotcha.
So that means you got to do it. You're suggesting do it yourself, right? Which means you got to go find an act that you want to manage. So that means going to a lot of clubs. That means listening to a lot of music. And that means, being brave enough to approach artists, find out if they have a manager or not, and start to work with them.
Let's look at a real life scenario. Now, I know that when you got involved with Green Day, that they were already on a small record label.
Yeah.
Did you hear about them first through media, through social networks? Actually, because this is like 1995, so really the social networks weren't even.
But they didn't. No, I heard about them through somebody who worked for me.
Oh, you heard about them through someone else?
Yeah, a guy named David Hawkins, who's also a drummer in a terrific band, and
you went to check them out.
Yeah, he said, "Hey, there's this band that lives in Berkeley who are very good."
Okay. Now, if a student hears of an act that's performing, that is out there performing at wherever, do you advise a student, someone coming out of, like, say, Expressions or even the MRI program at San Francisco State, they got their MRI certificate in management, and they're like, look, I heard you guys are good, you got some buzz, you got all these YouTube views, you got all this press, I'd like to manage you. In that scenario, what do you think that the prospective manager should be aware of when approaching an act with that proposition?
Well, the manager should be aware of the fact that the artist probably has very high expectations and really thinks that if we just had the right manager, there'd be no holding us back, and would probably prefer to get somebody from Q Prime to manage them, and that it's going to be a hard sell.
do a hard sell?
Well, expect to have to, well, I don't mean doing a hard sell, ramming something down somebody's throat, but expect that you're going to meet a certain amount of resistance.
Okay.
And you just need to be persistent.
Where it's easier if you're under somebody else's apprenticeship and you have an affiliation and they have the name and then things blossom.
Yeah, and that you might want to consider, if you find an artist that you really believe in, that you think is terrific, you might want to consider reaching some kind of alliance with a more experienced manager.
Okay. What is your philosophy on personal managers that invest financially in music artists? I've met a lot of managers, and it seems like down the middle, some are like, I absolutely would never do it. Some say, well, there are certain instances in which I have to do it. Mm-hmm. What's your take?
Sometimes you got to do it. If you really, really care about an artist of yours and they're really struggling financially, sometimes you got to do it. And you just got to realize you're doing it, and there's a decent chance you're never going to get your money back. But it's just an investment that you're willing to make in one of the careers of your clients. Every once in a while, kick myself. I was sort of in the running about 10 years ago to manage somebody who ended up getting huge. And I saw him playing at South by Southwest, and he was fabulous. Unsigned, unknown. And I have a feeling that if I had been willing to say, I will guarantee you $50,000 your first year, or I'll loan you $50,000 and it's non-recourse loan. I can only get it back from money you earn. That I would have ended up managing him, and I just wasn't willing to pull the trigger, and my loss.
Wow. Which is a bit of a sell.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's a bit of a it's a bit of a jump. Your leap. It's a bit of a leap. You got to be willing to do it. Sometimes you just got to believe enough in one of your artists to do that.
So. And there's a couple of more questions here.
But let me it also creates kind of a funny relationship when you're an investor in your artist's career as well as being the manager, because all of a sudden they're kind of beholden to you financially. And it doesn't feel like a really comfortable situation to me. Well,
that kind of goes back to expectations. And just what I'm noticing is that more recently, some artists are actually expecting that. Whereas once upon a time, they were expecting for you to get the record deal, which brought about a certain amount of investment anyway.
And now the record deals are much scarcer and much smaller than they ever were before, and so it's harder, and the money has to come from somewhere. Sometimes it's the manager. I think there are a lot more outside investors now than there ever were before, certainly in my experience.
Okay. And your take on that is to?
Well, if you look at a musical artist as a business, just let's take away the artistic side for a second. It's just a business like any other business, and it needs to be adequately capitalized in order to succeed. And the money's got to come from somewhere. So the question is, where's it coming from?
Where is it coming from?
Yeah. Right. Sometimes there's just no outside investors, and sometimes as a manager, you just got to suck it up and, just take the chance.
Suck it up and dish it out.
Yeah, because, it's already a big chance. Because the chances are, if the artist doesn't make money, the manager doesn't make money, and the manager has expenses, so the manager's going to lose money representing a young artist a lot of times. And now if you're coming up with some investment capital on top of it.
Okay. Yeah, hence the term investment, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about was being able to distinguish between the personal manager and the business manager. I know that at San Francisco State, there seems to be this serious confusion between personal manager, business manager, and agent.
Okay.
If you could just define.
Okay, define them. Once again, the manager, pretty much the CEO of the company, runs the day-to-day business of the artist, business affairs.
Gotcha.
A business manager is just a fancy name for an accountant.
That guy who keeps you out of trouble with the IRS.
Right, keeps you out of trouble with the IRS, makes sure your taxes get paid, makes sure that when money comes in, an adequate amount is kept to pay the tax authorities, helps you run the finances for your tours, sometimes pays your bills, other times not, usually collects all of your income. Okay. So that's what a business manager is. An agent, in the music business at least, is pretty much somebody who books your live gigs. Okay. That's what an agent does. Now, there's a law in California, part of the labor code, that says that you're not allowed to procure employment for a musical artist unless you are a registered talent agent.
Gotcha.
So managers are not supposed to be procuring employment.
Even though the majority of artists say they want a manager who can get them gigs.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, it used to be. The law was such, until fairly recently, the law in California was such that if you procured employment once for an artist and you were the manager and you were not a registered talent agent, they could fire you. Several years, sometimes, down the line, they could just fire you for having done it once. The law is somewhat different now.
Yeah. I think that has something to do with Jennifer Lopez getting out of her contract with Benny Medina back in the day. And so to make that distinction between the booking agent and the talent agent, there's also...
No, talent agent, booking agent, same thing.
Okay. And so within different talent agencies, there are people that handle booking and people that do booking for film and television as well, correct?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, there'll be music people and film and television people, and now more and more the big agencies especially have people that work on hooking you up with brands, clothing and clothing experts and merchandising experts and makeup experts or whatever.
I just want to ask you a couple of questions about what it is that you've learned. Let's do some name association, okay?
Okay.
I've mentioned an artist and you tell me what you've learned, okay? What did you learn from your experience with Goapele?
One of the things I've learned is that you can't manage everybody. And I love Goapele, and I still work with her as an attorney. But I just was the wrong person to be managing her because I was too old and, too white. Just in terms of, not in terms of my musical taste, really. And I just didn't understand her music well enough.
Too white. Yeah. I guess one could also be too black, That's interesting.
She's a real hip hop fan, and I'm not.
Right.
And I have strong feelings about the kind of songwriting that starting with a hip-hop perspective causes, because it's so heavily beat-oriented and rhythm-oriented and not melody-oriented that you end up with songs that are based on, 4-bar loops or 8-bar loops, and I just don't think that makes for inherently interesting songs. It's just my taste, She loves that stuff. And so...
stripped down.
Yeah. And so, I want songs with chord patterns that are different in the verses from the choruses that have bridges, and that wasn't that important to her. Okay. And so I think my advice on an artistic level wasn't great advice. Okay. So.
It wasn't great advice for her?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it took me a while to realize that. And then we both just reached an accommodation that I'm not the right person, but she really trusts me. And has faith in me, and I really like her and think she's a terrific singer. Right. And we just changed the relationship.
Right. So. It kind of goes back to some of the things that you said earlier with regard to the whole respect and managing expectations. I'm quite sure going in that she already had her certain way of doing things. You already had this preference or this perspective on how music should be, and coming from a group like Sean and I, where they're so musical, clearly there's going to be some things there, there's some discrepancies there. What about Green Day? What'd you learn there?
Oh, what I learned from Green Day, oh my goodness. I've learned a lot. I learned, that I had the capability of being a great manager. I also learned that I really had to pay more attention to what my clients really wanted than what I thought was good for them. I think that was the hardest lesson for me.
More attention to what they wanted.
Right, than what I wanted for them.
What you wanted for them.
Yeah.
Now that's deep. That's important.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because as a manager, you're really serving your clients. You got to remember that.
The manager serves the clients.
Yeah.
Okay. So we get to the point of this interview. I I would like for you to give some crash course tips.
Crash course tips.
Crash
Okay.
course tips to our audience about various aspects of management, whether it's getting into management or whatever criteria they should use to select a manager that might guide their career.
Okay. So crash course tips. The first question is, should you be a manager? It sounds like a lot of fun. Should you do it? Well, there are a couple of skills that you need. And one of them is really the ability to manage other people, because that's a lot of the job. If you've got a band that's signed, you're going to be dealing with record companies, you're going to be dealing with agents, you're going to be dealing with publishers, with merchandising companies, with promoters, with crew. And you basically need to manage them on behalf of your clients. So if you're not good at that, you're probably not going to be a good manager. So that's number one. In terms of, you really need to be outgoing. If you're really introverted and don't deal well with people and don't feel comfortable approaching people you've never met before and knocking on doors, you're probably not going to be a good manager. So that's the question of, should you really do it? Second of all, if you've decided you've really done it, you need to hone a set of skills. And you can come at it from all sorts of different angles. I mean, I've come at it from being a lawyer, so I'm a pretty skilled negotiator, which is certainly helpful. But there are a lot of really, really good managers that have been tour managers that have really gotten very good at organizing the enormous numbers of people that need to be organized. Are we stopping? Oh, we're good. We're going to still continue to go. In terms of getting the experience, I mean, I know some first-time managers who've been very good out of the box just because they had the skill and the personality traits and the persistence to just make them good at something immediately. But that's not always the case. It would be a good idea to apprentice somehow for a manager. Go volunteer your time. People do internships for nothing all the time now. Find a good manager, say, hey, I will work for you for nothing for 6 months. I just want to learn what you do. It will certainly help you in attracting clients if you have that kind of experience. So if you're coming at it completely blind first time, just anticipate that you're really going to need to sell yourself to a client, because artists naturally want somebody who's been very successful. And you're going to potentially be competing with people who are a lot more successful than you are. So you need to be able to persuade them that you're the right person for them. And sometimes you might be willing to work for them for nothing for a while, or you need to show them somehow that you've got what it takes to be successful, effective managers for them. In terms of choosing a manager as an artist, a couple of things to think about. One of them is it's important to realize that they're not going to make you successful, or not ultimately. Really, you're going to make yourself successful just through the quality of your music and through the quality of your performances. They can screw things up for you. They can stop you from making stupid decisions yourself. They can give you good advice, but it's really in your hands. That's just an important thing to understand. So don't think that, oh my God, if I get this manager, my career is going to be huge. If I don't get this particular manager, then I'm nowhere. It's not like that. And don't let them make you think that that's the case either, that you need them so desperately. There are lots of opportunities that arise. If you're good enough and work hard enough and are persistent enough, then sooner or later you're going to be successful. In terms of what to expect of them, you should expect them to be dedicated to your career, to work really, really hard for you, to represent you the way you want to be represented. If it turns out that their personality is so strong and they insist on doing something that's uncomfortable to you or embarrassing to you, that's not the right manager for you. In terms of realism, important to understand that managers are in this to make money. It's their career. You may be willing to do it for next to nothing, just because it's so much fun to be a musician, and because there's always that dream that's kept alive. But they're in it much more as business people. So they need to make money. If they're not making money, then they're not going to be terribly happy with the situation, ultimately. And that most of the money they're going to be making, if you're a new artist, is going to be at the end of the term. It's going to be later on rather than at the very beginning, because at the beginning, no one's making any money. So if they ask you for a term that's, you just want to be able to get out of the deal whenever you want, that's not terribly realistic. If they're asking you for 4 or 5 years and you only want to give them 1 and then you want to be able to get out, that's not terribly realistic either, because they're not going to make any money in that first year. And that the compromise, which your lawyer can help you craft, is going to be a term that starts out short, but then if you've reached certain levels of success, that the manager has the right to extend the term. That's fair to expect. In terms of how much you're going to pay them, you can expect to have to pay somewhere between 15 and 20% of your gross income, with some exceptions, and that you may well be able to negotiate a split of net profits when you're on the road, just because your expenses are so high when you're on the road that commissioning 20% of your gross income is really going to hurt you financially.
Okay. Those are great tips. Those are great tips. Okay, so my question is regarding music business education.
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be this thought that if you want to be a personal manager and you have all of these skills and qualities and characteristics that you mentioned, if you don't really understand the business thoroughly, or you don't have this comprehensive knowledge of how the music industry operates, that you can kind of learn as you go along.
Mm-hmm.
What is your perspective on that?
Well, I think most successful managers, that's exactly how they've done it. They've learned as they went along, especially in the early years when the business was sort of being created as we went along. Look, you can learn things in a number of ways. You can either learn it by the seat of your pants, you can learn it apprenticing for somebody else, you can learn it in school. If the schools are good, and you can really learn a lot of the skills you need, I think it's a great way to learn. So no guarantee of anything, but
no guarantee. But having music business mastery is not something that you're like, this should be a prerequisite before becoming a personal manager.
Well, no, I don't think so. But the funny thing, from the idea of, do you want to spend $30,000 a year for a couple of years learning this? It's different. If you're going to go be a doctor or you're going to go be an accountant, and you go to graduate school and you spend the money and you come out, there's a job waiting for you somewhere. You can make a decent amount of money doing something.
Right.
If you're going to be a personal manager, there's no guarantee, even if you're really good, there's no guarantee that you're ever going to make a dime.
Gotcha.
You need to find the right artist to work with. Okay. So it's a scary kind of investment, I think.
Yeah, and it's an investment that a lot of people are making,
yeah.
At these various music business colleges.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm seeing them do it on a regular basis. Well, that wraps it up, Elliot.
Good.
I want to thank you so much for your time. And
Gian, my pleasure, as always.
Thank you so much.